Alright, we're going to pick back up where we open up the seams and we iron out our blocks, starting at the back and then flipping over to the front. Make sure your seams are open so they can be ironed flat. Something I should have mentioned before, when you iron in your seams like this and you sew across those, make sure that you sew them with them open. However, if it turns out like this because you sewed it over that way, it's not a big issue. Just iron it down. It's not going to bubble or make it terribly off or anything. It's not a big deal. So iron all your blocks to nice neat stacks, make them nice and flat. Alright, now that we've got all of our blocks cut and sewn together, I should also mention at this point that either I can't math or I can't count. All of those is a possibility. But if you look at my sheet real good right here, you notice that there's actually 17 solid blocks. So I went back and just cut one more of the little cookie cutter gingerbread house. Anyway, so what we're going to do next is we're going to start putting our blocks together into rows. So according to my handy dandy little scribble sheet here, we're going to go 3 of the 9 patches and 2 of the solids and then alternate it, and altogether we're going to have 7 rows. 5 blocks across, 7 rows down. So what we're going to do first is let's lay it out so we can get a visual of it. Is we're going to have our 9 patch, a solid, nine patch, a solid. Oops, and looky here, looks like I'm going to have to go back and cut another one. My fabric was too far inside, so I'm going to pull that one aside, and I'll go back and cut another one here in a minute. And I'm running out of space, so I'm going to pull that over. So this is basically what our first row is going to look like. And if you notice, I've got a little extra, so I've either mismeasured, miscut, or something. So I'll probably go through and let me see what I've got here. So these are actually only 9-inch blocks. Yeah, it's possible. I mess up all the time. So now that they're just solid, we're going to go over here and we're going to cut a 1/2 inch off of 2 sides to make a 9-inch block. If you want to know how I figured that out, I don't know if I could explain, because obviously I am off my game and I can't do math, and we're still quilting and it's still going to turn out at this point. When it gets more complicated, don't ask how I make more complicated quilts when I do simple things like this. But that's okay, because we're going to figure this out eventually. So I'm going to go through before I start sewing all these together, cut off 2 sides, 1/2 inch on this side, 1/2 inch on this side, and that should give me a 9-inch block. Always measure, 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 and make sure I haven't lost it when you're following along. So then what we're going to do after we make sure all our blocks are lined up and they're all the same size is we're going to sew them together here, 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 and then we're going to iron them out. So for the next row, we're going to do very similar, only we're going to alternate it the other way. I always like to lay out my stuff and give myself a visual when I'm trying to put blocks together, because I'm a very visual person. So what we're going to have here okay, seem to pick them up. This is going to look like this, and these are going to be our rows going down. So right now like I said, we're going to sew all these strips together, and then we're going, after we've sewn all of our ones right here and right here, all our vertical lines, we're going to iron them out, and we're going to have 7 rows to put together. So we're halfway there. All right, see, line up the 1/2 inch ruler, part of the ruler, and just cut it off. If you notice, you will see that that's a stack of 4 rather than an individual. Make sure they're lined up very straight if you're going to cut more than one at a time. If you're just a beginner, I would suggest maybe doing one at a time, because you get one off and you're going to be off all the way around. Alright, as I was putting these together, you'll notice that everything doesn't quite line up straight. So what I'm going to do, since we know one of these edges are the most straight cut. Sometimes we get a little wonky. So I'm going to follow with my 1/4 inch down the straightest known line. Sometimes you'll notice, sometimes you're off a little bit. This is almost too much off as far as a 1/4 inch here. But since we've already shrunk our blocks, we're going to use that as our base measurement. And these will probably vary a little bit because of the way the sewing's done on the back. Even though it looks all nice, straight and even, there's still going to be a little room for error. But when we sew it, we're going to take it right down the solid block. See, our 1/4 inch is going to go right down this straight line here. So the first part of our first row is done. And something I should also mention, since this is a one-way design, always make sure that it is facing up. Whatever direction that is for the rest of it, make sure it's facing up. Now that we have our nice little strips of, or I should say rows, not strips, our nice little rows, it's time to start putting our rows together. And if you've noticed, you know, there's a little hangover here, and here. For a beginner, I would say maybe take your nice little blocks, throw them down on your grid, line them up, make sure that they're going to line up better. Me, I just run roughshod over my mistakes. So I'm not going to worry about those right now. So we're going to lay out our rows, probably 2 by 2 here. So this is our alternating pattern that we're doing now. What I'm going to do is face them, and I'm going to line up my seams. And since I have my excess here, I'm going to leave that on the outside, and I'm still going to line up my seams really, really close right there. And as I'm sewing this, I'm going to keep in mind that there's going to be little blips and things that I can just sew past. So, if you notice, my seams aren't quite lining up right here because our things are a little bit off. Not a big deal. Most cotton has a little bit of stretch to it, so I'm just going to tug it just gently, very little, right to there. Stick my pin in. Same with the rest of these. Line up all my things here. Put pins in it. And Get my corners lined up just so. Alrighty. So, we're going to go through, so across this line right here. Under here, you can see it's a little off. So I'm going to probably try to watch my lines here the most. I'm also going to double check, make sure all my things are facing upward. Maybe stick in a few more pins just so things don't move around. And this one is going to be a little bit further up, so here and at the end. And I may go ahead and put all of these together before I take them all over to sew. That way when I sit down, I just zip, 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 zip. And I'll have them in stacks of 2 like this. A square on the top, solid on the bottom. The next row, same way. Squares on the top, solid on the bottom. Line it up, pin it, stick it in my stack, get it ready to sew. And since we've got 7 rows, you're going to have an odd number row. Not a big deal, because what we're going to do next is after we've got 1 row put together, we're going to keep adding our rows to it. So as soon as one gets put on, we're going to attach the other one just like we did the last. This has a nice little tug right here, so if you're off, that one not so much. This one is going to be the one that you can have a little wiggle room with. So let's get over there and sew. Alright, another trick, tip, whatever you want to call it, that I might add here is when you're adding your rows together, if you've got 4 or more rows going, before you sew it together, line it up and make sure these are going to be level, especially on the ends, when our ends are kind of kooky like this, because that way you won't have as much lopsided things going on here, is because if your seam that you've already done is lined up and you're about to sew this one, see how much extra I've got going on here? It'll help balance everything out if you measure up against your other seams. Alright, now that we've got it all ironed out, we now have our Christmas quilt. And amazingly, our lines even lined up, so we actually don't have a lot of kooky places in it. See, they all lined up nice and neat. Now it's time to figure out how we're going to quilt it to put it together. The embellishments, the way we stitch it, and everything else also goes into how the quilt looks in the end. So we're only about halfway done. What I'm thinking for this one is just putting a layer of fleece on the back and quilting it from there. So I have to get the fleece, and then we'll get back to actually learning how to quilt the 2 pieces together. Another time when we do quilts, we may do the whole sandwich thing where we put the fabric on the back, the loft in the middle, and all that. But for this cute little one we're doing for Christmas, I think we're just going to do fleece.